everyone, I'm Ivan. I run ecosystem over at Aragon, and I've been fortunate enough to be coordinating this panel. Everyone else here is much more smarter than me, so it's a bit intimidating, but let's see what we can do. So we have Martin here from RockawayX Labs. They're building a node monitoring infrastructure as well as smart stake rebalancing. We have Zahary from Nimbus team, who are building a lighter Ethereum client. And last but not least, we have Lanski from Dappnode, plug-and-play nodes that anyone can run from their home. Our topic today is about decentralization. And Vitalik defined decentralization across 3 types. So you have political, architectural, and logical. And so it's a multidimensional beast. But we'll start from the inverse picture. So we'll start with centralization, which it's a naturally occurring phenomenon. We call it economies of scale. But within our space, it's a bad thing. And so my first question is, like, which centralization are you most scared about? Which part of the stack or which dimension of it? Take it away.
Maybe I can take it. I think in this ecosystem, there's a lot of work going into how do we create the centralized systems that are resilient to certain centralization vectors or single points of failure, censorship resistance. A lot of the brain power when designing protocols is spent on this particular way. But then, like, for example, I'm going to give an example. Ethereum and proof of stake was designed to be extremely decentralized, meaning that there was a low barrier of economic entry, 32 ETH. Back then, when this was thought out, it was not that much money. Now it's quite expensive. Then there are incentives or the penalties for being offline were on purpose very minimal to encourage people that do not have reliable internet connections to be able to work on that. And there was these incentives to centralization. There's a little known feature on the protocol that is correlated penalties, that your validator, if it goes down, the penalty for being down is higher the more validators are down in the same time. And this is clearly meant to, like if an Amazon, or if a big data center with lots of validators goes down, the correlated penalty will be higher. So it's meant to incentivize, do not have everything on one data center, decentralize it. So what I'm trying to say is, even if you create and design a system on purpose so it will be maximally decentralized, there are, like, the systems or economic systems evolve and you have new threats coming all of the time. For example, MEV. MEV is a big centralizing force because of the power distribution of rewards. People that own a lot of validators, institutions that own or run a lot of validators, fall into lottery blocks a lot more often, therefore have a higher revenue that single validators or solo stakers. So this is the centralization that I'm most worried about, which is the one that's not predicted, the one that's not obvious, the one that will happen no matter how you try to design it, the one that will come out of the woodwork.
Makes sense. It's something that we've seen a lot in DAOs, is this, like the celebrity delegate, they appear at the top, everyone just delegates to them because that's like your default option. And we see that happen in, which node do you delegate to? And I know, Martin, we had a cool discussion around, like, how do we solve for this? Like, how should we present nodes so that people actually choose?
Right. I guess the centralization risks this addresses is sort of somebody who's effective at getting stake, as you call the celebrity delegate, right? Initially, they get more capital, they have higher rewards, they can reinvest faster, and then they can become even more powerful, right? That's a very natural centralizing force. They're more effective, they have more money, they can expand faster. And what often does happen is, the maybe validators who have the best BD or who are most well known, they somehow become these still celebrity delegates. And I think the way to counter that is to provide reputation services. So for all those validators who are maybe further out at the tail, who don't have as much capital to invest in, or they're not able to put in the effort to make themselves visible, they somehow need to gain visibility via, let's say, like a third-party service, right? That says, we're going to measure all these validators at the same scale and have a look, like, although these guys are not at the top, they're doing a very good job. And actually, if you score them on an absolute level, they are just as good as the big guys, but you wouldn't be able to pick them out of a lineup, right? Because there are thousands of these guys. So I believe one way to combat this is to just provide the same level of reputational services for everybody, which I think what's Taking Rewards is working in the space to provide sort of that reputation.
Yeah, I think one place where it maybe feels like we've won a victory against centralization is clients, right? Like a couple of years ago, Prism was like almost 70% of the network was running Prism. So how, like, are we out of the woods on that aspect, and what are the challenges ahead, Zahary?
Well, I think we have still a way to go before we kind of really see the client diversity where it needs to be, so kind of in order to protect the network from potential problems. But I'll get back to your original question, and it's related to this topic. Basically, what is the type of centralization that we should be most scared about? And I certainly think it's the political one, when there is only one entity making decisions, and there is kind of nobody else having the competence to kind of step in or propose an alternative to the users. And one important aspect of client diversity is exactly this. When there are multiple implementation teams who kind of understand the system well enough, you could argue that nobody could really propose something that's not in the interest of the community, because all the client teams will be able to kind of propose an alternative. We will always have a choice. For me, we should be asking what are these properties of decentralized solutions that are more attractive. And I think certainly one of the best benefits is that it is an escape hatch from this digital feudalism that we are finding ourselves into. We are kind of subject to the whims of kind of corporations which set up the rules of the software system that we use every day. And the other one is that the centralization is really a way to create these unstoppable services in the end of the day. They are both on technical level unstoppable because they eliminate the single points of failure, but they are also kind of unstoppable in regulatory terms quite often, where there's no single entity that you can target and in attempting to shut down a service. Like, one of the key benefits in the design of this decentralized protocols is that even if the development teams goes away, if the protocol is designed properly, it would be able to live on essentially forever.
Yeah, I think like the team walking away is one extreme event that we look at and we're like, okay, can a protocol sustain this? Censorship, economic pressure, and it's important to have that designed, into the protocol. But to Lanski's point, right? Like, centralization pops up here and there, and it's sort of like a dynamic battle that we keep fighting, right? And that means that if the enemy, right, it's a natural force, but it keeps evolving. So should we. And a popular topic now is the ungovernance, which is like, let's ossify contracts. Like we create a protocol, it's unchangeable, immutable. Also on the protocol side. Do you think that's sustainable? Like, can we fight an evolving battle without our ability to evolve?
Yeah, if I can take that up, I don't believe that. I don't think so, because I totally agree with Lanski's point on how you summarized it. However you design the protocol, somebody's going to find a way to sort of unbalance it, right? If you think of decentralization, what are you trying to do? You're trying to maintain this whole system in some sort of balanced state. You want to have, you want to have some parameters within bounds, but humans are very ingenious, and some way always comes up to unbalance the system. So talking about designing protocols to be decentralized like gives us this sort of ideal mindset of if I do it right, I'm done. And I just don't think that's true. That's never going to happen. If you want to focus on being decentralized and maintain these properties that come along with it, like credible neutrality, it is always going to be a continuous battle. And you can never stop. And I think what's interesting about decentralization, by the way, it has these aspects of this prisoner's sort of dilemma problem, right? It's great for me if all of you decentralize and I have to worry about it because I get to use this credibly neutral infrastructure, but at the same time, I'm not constraining myself. I'm able to make as much money as I can, grow my stake. Hopefully not too much. We want to maintain the state, but it'd be great if you guys take the cost. So what this leads to is you can achieve or you can keep decentralization happening while there are interested parties who are willing to uphold it as a value and invest in it. It's always going to cost. Because if the system becomes unbalanced and you want to rebalance it, it is going to cost effort, money, time, and attention. So there always has to be someone who says, okay, it's my job to do my part in decentralization. So in our case, we found foundations, blockchain foundations that are good partners for this because, hey, they started this whole chain. Now they're charged with managing this treasury of tokens, and they're supposed to sort of evolve the ecosystem while maintaining these parameters, this decentralization, right? So I think it's really important to understand like who the players are who are supporting decentralizations in various ways. And by the way, I was thinking about this. Are you guys the only ones who are helping decentralization without being funded? Because you mentioned you guys were self-funded. So I think it's an interesting sort of counterpoint to what I was always thinking. But you guys are managing to help decentralization without sort of getting a party that would fund you.
Right. So I guess we're entering territory of public goods, right? What are public goods? How do we fund public goods? Is this a sustainable model to incentivize decentralization? Speaking about incentives, maybe it is. I don't have the answer for this, but it's definitely what is working right now. And yes, as far as I know, Dappnode. Well, no, there's more. There's Ethereum. There's Nicenode. There's probably a couple more that provide ways of running your own node in a simple way. And yeah, I think they're all basically considered public goods. And maybe here the incentive for decentralization is some sort of protocol revenue directed to public goods. What are the things that we believe that are contributing the most? Not only belief, but maybe like we could come up with several metrics. What are the things that contribute the most to keeping that decentralized and paying it off? That said, this sounds really good on practice, but for the day-to-day operations of an organization that provides these public good services, this is a pain in the ass, I'm telling you. Not knowing where the next funding round is going to come, where the next grant is going to come. So somehow, all these public goods, so there's got to be something in the protocol that already allows for some sort of predictability on that. We cannot rely only on grants or this sort of stuff.
You mentioned foundations. You're in essence a public goods provider, and so there are clearly different stakeholders that contribute towards the protocol, and that begs the question: is governance needed, or is it just another attack surface, or is it a way to incentivize people to feel more ownership and work for the greater good of the network?
Governance is going to be necessary, because if we're talking about dynamic systems, complex adaptive systems, it is very unlikely that we are going to create these checks and balances from the beginning, from the get-go. Technology if we keep adding new features, we're going to have to also add other things that counterbalance what these new features bring into the system, right? And here so some sort of governance will be necessary. Now, what sort of governance? Zahary was mentioning having different client implementers and like the sort of like the Ethereum governance over what features go in or how do we implement those features. That's always going to be necessary, but at the same time, as you mentioned, it is a vector attack if you don't plan it properly. If you do token-voted governance, you get rent-free value extractors that will buy your token when it's down, and then will attack the governance of the protocol because they will acquire the majority on the protocol.
And that opens a lot what Zahary was mentioning around like the political decentralization. Are there remedies to that attack vector that you feel particularly excited about?
Well, I mean, there are formal systems of governance, right? For example, how a DAO is operated. Like, there are members with certain voting rights. They have to make unanimous decisions and so on and so forth. But there's other kind of governance where people just vote with their feet, right? If they are presented with alternatives, they can freely choose like what's in their best interest. And I think this one is actually more flexible. So if a protocol has the option to use it, that's kind of usually for the benefit of the users. But sometimes you have to use the DAO model, especially if you are managing resources of some kind. Something that was kind of previously mentioned here and I found interesting is that this claim that kind of the centralization has to be actively kind of subsidized to some level by somebody, either a foundation or maybe kind of everybody who is participant is doing it for idealistic purposes and so on and so forth. And why I found this to be true sometimes, it doesn't necessarily have to be universally true. I think sometimes the centralization can be completely rational choice for kind of the users of a particular system. Because sometimes, and these are relatively rare opportunities, but it could be more efficient than a centralized system. This tends to happen when the protocol manages to somehow leverage the idle resources of all the participants. Because everybody has a lot of computing power on their disposal. You have personal computers, laptops, our phones are supercomputers by kind of prior standards and so on and so forth. So for example, Status, the company that's sponsoring Nimbus, is trying to leverage these idle resources to build, say, an efficient file storage network or an efficient communication network. And in the end of the day, we can come up with a solution that is more cost-effective than the centralized provider offering file backup or kind of the Dropbox and companies like that.
You have something here.
Yeah, like that's clearly a big. I'm a big proponent of economies of scope to counterbalance economies of scale, right? Economies of scale are extremely powerful and they allow you to run thousands and thousands of validator, run with the cost of running one execution and one consensus node, for example, if we're talking about Ethereum again. So that's like that's the cost of like 1 terabyte of storage plus a little bit of bandwidth, and you can run thousands of these. A solo staker has the same cost of running this execution, this 1 terabyte, and the same bandwidth cost, etc. But they're only running one validator, or two, if they're fortunate enough. Economies of scope can solve that. This machine that you already have running, you can put more stuff. Maybe you cannot run an Ethereum validator, but maybe you can share part of your storage on the Swarm network. Maybe you can share some of your bandwidth for Waco communication protocols. Maybe you can, so economies of scope, expanding what your machine can do with non-competing resources is something that will allow for this true decentralization of infrastructure, right? We're talking about infrastructure decentralization now, to happen. Yeah.
Martin, does running different protocols on the same machine, sort of resource sharing, like, do you think that is feasible, or do you think it reduces some systematic risks?
Yeah, I think it is feasible, and I'd prefer this systematic risk over this happening inside like one data center, right? I mean, obviously there's correlated risk now. If that node goes down, it affects 2 different protocols. But I mean, unless that's a significant part of those protocols, it's likely not going to cause any havoc. Like you'll get slashed, but you're not endangering the network, right? On the other hand, if everybody is sitting in that the cheapest data center, that's where you have significant voting power aggregation, and that's not gonna. I really like this idea of economics of scope. By the way, it's in my mind it kind of captures the long tail of these things that have to be handled on the blockchain, and these frequently fall outside the purview of the big professional validators, right? They want to focus on this one thing, do it the best, and scale out. Whereas then that leaves the soul stickers to sort of be more nimble and be able to capture some of that value.
I think the value of this long tail also increases with things like restaking, for example.
Right.
Because restaking, so reutilizing the economic security of Ethereum for other protocols on a smaller scale, like maybe there's a secondary protocol on restaking that only requires, let's say, like 50 million in order to properly secure this protocol. Well, there's a lot of institutional providers or pools that have already these 50 million on themselves. So if only one political actor takes care of the security of this protocol that's using restaking, that's not decentralization. You're not using it right. But all of a sudden, this long tail gains a lot of value, because if lots of them manage to restake their ETH and be offering economic security to these other protocols, and they're part of the long tail, all of a sudden, this protocol that's only using 50 millions of economic security manages to have a politically decentralized set of validators.
I want to switch it up a notch and talk about the incentives, which is like half the half the panel today. You mentioned some sort of like revenue going back to the providers of public goods, and like block rewards and like fee, like transaction fee share going to node validators is like one element of that. But there are networks that need bootstrapping, and you need more direct incentive models there. And we've gone through several cycles of airdrop summer, and we kind of know that doesn't really work too well for the long term. What are your thoughts, or like, is there a model that you're excited about which has the promise to do a more long-term incentive alignment?
I haven't seen anybody sort of come up with a good model here. It feels like it should be some sort of incremental. As you deepen your engagement, you're sort of getting more airdrops. I think the original idea of airdrops makes sense. You want to distribute the governance token widely, so you start up with a more dispersed sort of control. The problem with, and I think that's everybody already knows this by now, is like when you airdrop these tokens immediately at the start of the protocol, the first thing that most of the people are going to do is dump them the moment the decentralized exchanges list them. And this has been happening for some time. Like, I haven't seen a really good solution that would help this out. But it feels like an incremental onboarding campaign where you would get, as you perform more actions with the protocol, you'd get these incremental airdrops. Would absolutely make sense here. And the only reason it's not happening is it feels like it's not a priority for the protocols that they're developing. That's one of the things that we see when we consult with, let's say, app chains in Cosmos when they're starting up. They have so much, they're putting so much of the attention to get the code base right? To avoid bugs, to try to, have all the functionality in place. And then they don't even take necessary care to select the right validators, right? So they rush that. And then airdrop, I mean, come on, that's like, 0.456 on the radar. So frequently, I think they go with a simple option and just, and then it doesn't really serve the decentralization. So I can't give you a happy answer here. I haven't seen anybody do this sort of in a way that would feel right.
I think you touched on a very interesting point here, though. You said it's not a priority for the team designing the protocol. So it's, the person that is, or the team that is deciding about distributing the incentives, their incentives are not aligned.
Very meta. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Airdrops are an excellent way to reward founders, founders of the project. They get a massive bag. They can use it. There might be lockups, but as you very well pointed out to me in a previous conversation, you can sell these lockups at a haircut, but you can sell these lockups before they vest. So they're an excellent way of incentivizing founders, not necessarily to incentivize actual work on the protocol. And speaking about the right incentives. It's not that I have the solution, not at all, but airdrops are not one. But maybe a combination between conditional airdrops and proof of work. Proof of work is still the best way of rewarding. You do the work, I give you money. But how do you attract people to do the work? Maybe with a conditional airdrop. Maybe you go and say like, hey, I have seen, to use the same, I'm not trying to innovate a lot, but to use the same model as it is being now. How do you get an airdrop? Because you're on a list, because you have something, you have done something in the past. So it has some sort of reputational aspect to it, tying back to what you were saying, Martin, before on creating these reputational lists. But you're on a list, you have done something. Therefore, somebody thinks that you have the ability to participate in this protocol and do some work for this protocol. Help me decentralize this protocol. Now, you're on this list and say, hey, if you do this work, I have selected you as one of the people that will bootstrap my protocol. Now, start running this, and for sure, you will get at least this package, plus then you will keep receiving, by proof of work, like whatever the usage of the protocol is, whatever, like, and hopefully, you can design a system that has the right balance. But yeah, as I said, I haven't cracked this code.
I think an interesting element here is what Zahary mentioned of users voting with their wallet. And users voting with their wallet in more traditional sense doesn't involve tokens, right? It involves like, where do you go to spend your money to fulfill your service? And it feels like users probably are the ones that have the power to change the mind of the teams that are building the protocols. So how do we make users care?
Yeah, I think that's $1 million question, honestly speaking. Like so, but I wanted to add a little bit to those airdrops. Yeah, airdrops are now distributed based on retrospective actions. So the fun part is people are actually guessing what's going to be the criterion for the next airdrop, right? So it's randomized. Like there are people who would like to do something, obviously. So back to your question of incentivization, I think if you can reach that set of people who are willing to do the work, and there seem to be some, because they're even doing it speculatively, you might be able to have a controlled way of bringing them into the system, right? And incentivizing them step by step, as we said earlier. But I was just pointing out this, like, for me, ridiculous situation where you've got these speculations, like, hey, maybe I need to stake this and bridge this from here to there, and then I might be in the airdrop. Like, it seems so visceral to me. It seems so uncontrolled and crazy to spend money this way instead of actually, trying to onboard issues. And to answer your question, it feels like there still are, and there may be more people who are genuinely interested in crypto. And if you try to connect with these guys and offer those airdrops, not retrospectively, but prospectively, you've already solved half the problem. I don't know anybody who's tried.
It's a problem that we cannot obviously solve here, so because it's far too encompassing. But for a closing, I want to hear your closing thoughts on like where do you think lies the most power to drive this change? Is it the users? Is it the foundations? Is it the validators? If you can point towards like who's best positioned to start driving this change?
I think one of the kind of key values of, again, decentralized protocols is that they mimic the real economy. The real economy is already decentralized. Like, that's why the price discovery mechanism that we have is what makes the market-driven economy successful. And so if you want to design a successful protocol, you have to embed the same kind of market elements within it. So over time, we will find kind of use cases which are solving a real problem for the users, and by necessity, they will be decentralized in order to function like a real economy.
Thank you.
Feels to me that the answer changes over time. At inception, it's obviously the foundation that's holding most of the tokens, and it's performing these airdrops, is doing these delegation programs. It has the economic power, is in the driving seat. But if the protocol is maturing in a sensible way, that foundation wants to be giving up its power essentially to the community and the protocols that are active on the platform. So hopefully if the platform grows, the stakeholders then become vested in maintaining like a good, credibly neutral status so that they can all thrive on the platform, right? That'd be my answer.
You have the last say?
My co-panelists have summarized it pretty well. I would say airdrops don't work. They're great. Everybody loves them because everybody loves free money, but that's not a sustainable long-term solution for your protocol. And yeah, to summarize, there are different stages. Obviously, like the public cannot decide for a protocol that's still nascent or that is still, so the design work needs to happen previous to that. But then the adaptation, the measures that you take in order to be able to adapt how this protocol will still be incentivizing the right things that you want to incentivize with this protocol, that needs to be left flexible and to be changed later down the protocol, maybe by the public, maybe by the team, maybe by whoever is the most interested on keeping that protocol.
Thank you guys for this panel and for your thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.